Record 49, Side 1. Lesson number 49. The 49th lesson. Practical section. The theatre. Although the theatre is passing through difficult times today in Great Britain and elsewhere, save where the state helps to finance it, there is not the slightest danger of the art disappearing. It has, in this century, had to face and fight for its place against such intruders as the radio and now television, not to speak of the many other diversions which attract particularly the young today. It is important that the long tradition of the English theatre should always reach out, as it has done in the past, to the new generation, take it by the hand, as it were. But nowadays a play must have a sensational title or a morbid, prying, psychological plot before people's interest is aroused. The reason for this, however, does not form part of this conversation. Going back to the beginning of drama, excluding the miracle plays of the 15th century, representations of stories from the Bible, we find ourselves in the Elizabethan period, a part of British history which is often remembered as the epoch of Shakespeare. There are other famous playwrights in this era of English history. Marlowe was, before Shakespeare, the most important. The period is also important because the theatre, the actors, and everything appertaining to the presentation of plays began to be considered as serious work. Actors, instead of wasters and good-for-nothings, took the first steps towards respectability. Patrons in the form of nobles helped both the playwrights themselves and the theatre companies in the producing of plays. Besides these travelling companies, which played in castles and manor houses, there were theatres along the Thames in London, which were patronized by the population, even more critical than the nobility. They wanted a plot and action, as well as plenty of noise to keep them happy and guarantee the success of the production. There is no need here to list the plays of Shakespeare, nor even hint at the plots. Shakespeare's men and women were real, and life was often just as he represented it. And we have to thank the Elizabethan theatre for all he gave us. Not long after Shakespeare's death, during the Commonwealth of Oliver Cromwell, we have the only break in the great tradition of the theatre in the last 300 years. The Puritans closed them all, and for almost 12 years the theatre was no longer a part of the English way of life. The Restoration in 1660 saw the theatres reopen, and the people were joyful. The theatre has always been close to the heart of the Englishman. It is unfortunate that the theatres were principally to be found in London. In the provinces, there was not much activity, and even today, though there are many provincial theatres, every city has at least one, the long runs and great successes are registered in London. The large provincial cities are used very often as the testing grounds. The question is probably an economic one, for the staging of plays is a costly business and a gamble. Producers want to have a fair chance of getting their money back. They are not all interested in art for art's sake. Coming down from serious drama and tragedy, we have comedy, which has always been dear to English audiences. whether in the form of plays or comic opera, such as Gilbert and Sullivan gave us, and which paved the way for the present-day musicals, which are comedies with a slender plot, sometimes no more than the excuse for a plot, with many opportunities to create situations for a song, dance, or chorus in which the story is related. Another type of theatre, though it is usually considered quite different, is the music hall. Today, this sort of theatre is becoming less common. Only the greatest survive, for the most important names in the variety world can be seen more frequently on the cinema screen, where they probably make more money too. The great era of the music hall was prior to the First World War and just after. With the advent of the wireless and the growing popularity of the cinema, this medium had a less enthusiastic public following. For the children, there are pantomimes, which are, of course, in lighter vein. The subjects of these are taken from fairy tales, such as Cinderella, Peter Pan, Aladdin, Sinbad the Sailor, The Sleeping Beauty, and many others. The play is interspersed with variety acts, and the comedian is of prime importance for the children's amusement. The season for pantomime is around Christmas, and it is needless to say that they are very popular with all children between the ages of 8 and 80. The theatre is still very much alive, and playwrights are still producing new plays, but its once preeminent position in the entertaining of the public has been lost forever. Competition, which once was non-existent, is very highly commercialized, and the theatre today keeps going as a commercial concern only with great difficulty.
Side 2. Grammatical section. Agreements and disagreements. In Lesson 43, the constructions so plus auxiliary plus subject and neither plus auxiliary plus subject were given. Here is an example of each to refresh your memory. John went to the cinema, and so did Mary. I don't want to study, and neither does Joe. The auxiliary verb do has been used in both of these examples and gives us further proof of the innumerable uses of the auxiliary verbs in English. In this lesson, we shall see other common applications of the auxiliary verb. In simple agreements with affirmative statements such as the following, the subject and auxiliary come after the yes of agreement. He should go home if he's unwell. Yes, he should. They speak English very well. Yes, they do. James has a beautiful new car. Yes, he has. If the answer, while agreeing, expresses an element of surprise, it will probably employ so plus subject plus auxiliary. Do not confuse this with the construction given in Lesson 43 mentioned above. Your book has fallen on the floor. So it has. There's a car stopped outside our house. So there is. We've been here an hour now. So we have. Remember, of course, that the auxiliary verb is never abbreviated in these responses. When the listener considers the statement obviously correct, he may respond with "of course" plus subject plus auxiliary as follows. Notice that the subject and auxiliary in the second response, being practically superfluous, may be, and usually are, omitted. The police will probably catch the murderer in a day or two. Of course they will. I suppose they think they'll pass the exam easily. Of course they will. They've studied a great deal lately. That horse is expected to win the Derby. Of course it will. Other introductory words or expressions belonging to this category might be undoubtedly, indeed, and the like. I've been getting better results since I began studying seriously. Indeed you have. The construction used for disagreement is much the same as those just mentioned. Normally, the form of disagreement with a positive is the following: no plus subject plus auxiliary plus negative. Or, with questions and assumptions, but plus subject plus auxiliary plus negative. Here are a few examples. You have taken my pencil. No, I haven't. They were in the park when we came home. No, they weren't. Why are they leaving without me? But they aren't. How did John do that sum so quickly? But he didn't. I helped him. Expressions of disagreement with a negative statement take the form one would logically expect after studying the previous constructions. 1. Yes plus subject plus auxiliary. 2. But plus subject plus auxiliary. John hasn't any money. Yes, he has. You haven't prepared the lesson, I asked. But I have. Remember that the responses using but are usually stronger, more emphatic, and occasionally downright contradictory. A very common form of agreement which is used in colloquial English in response to either affirmative or negative statements is the simple yes or no, followed by the usual subject and auxiliary plus a question tag. Some examples will illustrate this better. You came in very late last night. Yes, I did, didn't I? He was as drunk as a lord when he left here. Yes, he was, wasn't he? John and Mary didn't do very well in their exam. No, they didn't, did they? We couldn't hear as well as I expected. No, we couldn't, could we? The acoustics were rather poor. Regarding contrary responses, the student must keep in mind the various meanings of the defective verbs. Can may be used to express permission. Its opposite, in this case, is mustn't, indicating prohibition. Occasionally mayn't is used in place of mustn't. He can come whenever he likes. No, he mustn't. We can leave the exercise till tomorrow. No, you mustn't. We're going out in the car. You mustn't go before 3 o'clock. Yes, you can. They mustn't turn on the radio while they're studying. Yes, they may if they study. In the same way, a contrary response to needn't requires the defective verb must. The children needn't study so much now they're on holiday. But they must. The exams are next month. He thinks he needn't study any more when he has his degree. But he must. We can always learn something new. John says I must take the children to the park. No, you needn't. I know Peter is waiting for you. Soldiers must run when the bugle blows. No, they needn't, except when the sergeant major sees them. Now cover the answers in your lesson booklet and give specimen answers to the following statements. Their friends have gone to London. They understand English and French very well. He's done that before. You didn't lock the door last night. Why weren't you invited to the party? The children must go home before dark. You've a black mark on your shirt. John and Peter must go to the dentist's.